Conversation, you can do so 601-879-4395. But first, we go to the Farm Bureau guest line for the one and only Kendall Rogers from D1 Baseball. Good afternoon, Mr. Rogers.
Hey, man, how's it going?
Hey, when you walk into your office at home, do you take your jacket off and put on a sweater and change from, dress shoes to slippers?
Absolutely not.
You should. And then have a trolley that runs through your office, fully embrace the Mr. Rogers thing?
I can do that. That seems like it'd be too much work.
It's a beautiful day in Kendall Rogers' neighborhood.
Yeah.
So 4 weeks left, and things are getting interesting, aren't they?
They are, man. I think you look at, the SEC, we've got a lot of things to determine, right? I mean, obviously at the top, Kentucky, lose that series to Tennessee, so you've got Tennessee, Kentucky, A&M, Arkansas. It's kind of the main teams there vying for the championship. Then, of course, at the bottom, it's getting really interesting in that bubble race, when you look at, teams like Florida, Ole Miss, and potentially even LSU. LSU could potentially get back in a discussion, too. Of course, they still have to play Ole Miss. We were talking about this earlier today on our postseason podcast. That Ole Miss, LSU series here in a couple weeks could be massive in so many ways.
It could be. All right, so talk me through LSU playing themselves back into the postseason.
Well, no, I'm just saying I'm saying that they finish strong, they could get back in there. The problem, the issue I run into when you look at LSU, I think if LSU really wanted to sweep Missouri over the weekend, I think we kind of talked about this last week, but without sweeping Missouri, you now have to definitely win a series against A&M or Alabama, which can be difficult. But so looking at LSU's remaining schedule, they're 5-13 in the league. Okay, let's assume for a second they take the Auburn series. That would be 7-14. Let's say they lose the A&M series. That would be 8-16. Let's say they win the Ole Miss series. That gives them at 10-17, and then they have to win the Alabama series. I mean, they'd have to win the Alabama series and then win a game in Hoover to even have a shot. It is a distant pathway to get to the postseason for LSU right now. Whereas I do feel like Ole Miss is in a little bit better shape because their RPI is at least in a more advantageous position at 24 versus 39.
What is Ole Miss's win over North Alabama today going to do to their RPI? We did this with State a couple of weeks ago with one of their midweek games, I think against Alcorn State. They were 240. So what is it? You win and it goes down 5-6 spots?
Yeah, so that game's over and it has not gone down yet. So that tells me that it may not go down.
So does it automatically update on your website based on when it happens?
It will. I mean, I have access to a back-end system. I am seeing, so looking at Ole Miss, I am seeing that Ole Miss will drop 3 spots tomorrow.
Okay, so they're going to fall from
just
20.
Playing the game.
Yeah. So they're going to fall from 24 to 27.
That's not bad. I mean, I would have thought it would have been worse, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. So we were talking yesterday about the roadmap for Ole Miss, and it's 7 more wins in conference play because they're sitting at 6 right now. So that gets you to 13, which means some combination of win 3 series and don't get swept by A&M, or you got to sweep somebody and then maybe you got just a little touch of wiggle room. Auburn would be the most likely candidate there, but have you seen anything from Ole Miss that makes you think they are consistent enough to win 3 straight games on a weekend?
No, Auburn, I'll be frank with you, Auburn on the road for this kind of Ole Miss team that they have this year really scares me because Auburn, I get it, they've won 2 games in conference, so it's easy to be oh, they're terrible. They're not terrible. It's just they've been unable to close out games. They've been unable to finish the job. Pitching, on the mound particularly, but they can really hit, man. So I think if you're Ole Miss, when you look ahead at the rest of the schedule, so looking at the rest of the schedule, just we did the same thing with LSU. Let's just say that Ole Miss wins the Alabama series this weekend. That's probably asking for a lot. But let's say they win it. They're sitting at 8-13. Okay. Let's say they win 2 out of 3 against Auburn. They're sitting at 10-14. And then you got A&M and LSU back-to-back weekends. So, again, if you lose those series, you're sitting at but you don't get swept, you're sitting at 12 wins going into Hoover. I think the big key for Ole Miss, just to at least give yourself a chance here, is to win the Alabama-Auburn series and at least take one against A&M and LSU. That gives yourself a chance. If you can still one of those final two series, I think you're probably going to get in. Yeah. But, I mean, that's easier said than done. So you
think there's a scenario where Ole Miss goes to Hoover with 12 wins and wins a couple of games and still could get in?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, who was it? Was it A&M last year that had 12 or 13 wins if they got to Hoover? And I think the committee said at the time they needed to win one to get in. They won the one game, and so they got in. I think 13 for me in kind of the revamped SEC now. I think if they can get to 13, and the same, frankly, goes for LSU. If you can get to 13, I think you're getting in. Unless there's a really tight bubble, which I don't think is going to be the case.
And then A&M ended up being a win away from a super regional out at Stanford when it was all said and done. All right, let's talk about Mississippi State for a second, because I am really intrigued with where the Bulldogs are and what they have remaining. They are now 10-8, and this to me, Kendall, is not a conversation about what's the roadmap to getting in. And Haydad may laugh at me for this. Is there a roadmap to Mississippi State hosting with 12 games remaining, sitting at 10 wins right now? Knowing that their RPI is an issue. It's an anchor.
Yeah, there's a roadmap. I mean, it's tough. I mean, so let's dive into that, right? So That's what we're here for. So right now, Mississippi State would need to win 15 remaining games to make it into the top 16. One of those games would be the Ole Miss midweek game left. How many games do they have left?
Like
15.
15.
Yeah, they'd have to win out to be in the top 16. So that means that looking ahead of the rest of the schedule, they've got to get in that kind of that 18, or if they can't get the top 16, get that 17 to 25 range. The way you do that, and what I'm looking at would suggest to get in the top 32, they need to win 11 out of their last 15 games.
Okay, so they got to win the series at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, you basically have to win your remaining series. Yeah.
Could they trade out a sweep for a series loss at Arkansas?
Correct. You could theoretically get swept at Arkansas as long as you just sweep somebody else.
And they finish out with Missouri at home.
Yep. And remember, that's not including the conference tournament. So that is a big caveat, whether it's Ole Miss once they get to Hoover or Mississippi State once they get to Hoover. If State went to Hoover and went on a run, let's say their RPI is like 32, it's not out of the realm of possibility they win 3 or 4 games, win 3 or 4 games at Hoover, and then their RPI is in the top 20. So if Mississippi State does a decent job down the stretch, Hoover is going to mean a lot for this team, potentially.
And, hey, Dad, that's crazy, right? Because Mississippi State has had years where they've made deep runs in Hoover, and they've had years where it looked like they didn't really care if they were there at all. But this is a year where it's really going to matter.
Yeah, I mean, the last time they were there, they went 2-Q. They got run-ruled in both games. Yeah. And then a few weeks later, they were celebrating a national title.
Well, here's the one thing I will say for State, and, I mean, we're looking way, way far away from now, but the thing that's really interesting is we were just going through our projections today. If you look at the SEC right now, A&M, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, barring some sort of amazing collapse, are all 4, I mean, pretty much set in stones as top 8s right now, just because the race for the top 8 is not very, hot and heavy. There aren't a lot of teams to put in the top 8. So, I mean, you could go in a situation to where if you're Mississippi State and you're in Hoover and you win your first game, I mean, you might face one of these teams that are already, set in stone to get into the top 8 that don't even, I wouldn't say don't care, but, they're not going to go throw, Tennessee's not going to throw Drew Beam, and A&M's not going to throw Ryan Prager, and Arkansas is not going to throw Hagen Smith on a Wednesday afternoon in Hoover. So, I mean, again, there is a pathway there, but, first things first, and that's Vanderbilt this weekend.
Tennessee has a 12-6 conference record. They have a win in the series against Kentucky. Given their remaining schedule, is there a scenario where Tennessee ends up winning the SEC?
There is. I mean, I look at the remaining. They're looking at the remaining schedule at Florida.
We got 30 seconds, Kendall.
Yeah, I mean, there is. I mean, right now, I probably lean Arkansas, A&M, or Kentucky. I mean, let's not forget Kentucky's still a couple of games ahead of Tennessee in the standings. So,
right.
I mean, there is a pathway there, but I mean, when you look at those 4 teams, I mean, who the heck knows at this point?
It's kind of crazy. It's going to be a wild final 4 weeks. Kendall, thanks as always for your time. Fun to go through these scenarios. We'll talk to you next week.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Be good.
Kendall Rogers joining us on the Farm Bureau guest line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home.